Max Gaw, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well and you're about a quarter of the way, maybe arguably a touch over now for 2023. Welcome to another Strategy Roundtable where I bring together some of the great members of the Coaches Panel to help you in your dream team, your SuperCoach and your AFL fantasy sides. Got a couple of members of the panel that you're very familiar with, but we've never had them on the same episode together. So a first time, long time podcast for you. MiniMonk, the Harry Sheasel of the fantasy footy community in 2023. I'm going to make this thing stick, my friend. I am committed to this, like the Adelaide Crows are subbing out Soligo when they shouldn't do it. MiniMonk, how are you, mate?
Good. I've had the bounce back. The coach is backing me in on the roll, and let's keep on rolling.
We're bringing you back in. So who is on the episode with MiniMonk? It is the great Kane, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, mate.
Hey, MJ. How are you, mate?
I'm good. Look, we're going to give you boys a little bit of format focus for this episode. There is a ton of stuff I want to get through. In a moment, I want to talk about different approaches, both for formats and coaching emphasis. We've got to start talking about the multi-buy rounds. They are just a month or so away. And so it really is, if you haven't thought about it, we'll help you with that. We'll get you out of jail, no problems at all. I want to talk about the Gold Coast Suns. I know all the talk is about Tasmania, but there's some very fantasy relevant players I want to talk about. Got to talk about cash cows, boosts for Dream Team and SuperCoach, potential DPPs and how that might impact our trading. And at the very end, we'll hit a couple of Patreon questions along the way. Of course, if you want to become a supporter of the Coaches Panel, you can do that through liking and giving 5-star rating and reviews to this podcast. It can be following us on social media. It can be telling people about the Coaches Panel and, of course, becoming a financial supporter of our Patreon. All the links are in the details of this podcast. So Kane, on this episode, I'm going to hand you SuperCoach, my friend. You're going to be my SuperCoach, eyes, ears, and voice, and MiniMonk. We're going to make you work double time. AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, my friend. While they are two same scoring formats, if you've played both of them, you know they need to be treated differently because there are a lot of that. But I want to talk right at the top about just these different mindsets and approaches we can come with our teams, both with how we've built our starting squads and how we've traded throughout the year. I know, MiniMonk, you've hunted a little bit more value across some of the formats and might not have had as many of the top end at the starting, whereas for you, Kane, you've maybe a bit more old school, quote unquote, built your team around the who you think is going to be in the best in a line, get the ones I want to start with, and then trade in. So maybe we'll start with you, Kane. Again, remembering you're our SuperCoach voice. Talk me through this strategy, and we'll come to you, MiniMonk, after that, because I think it's important to hear that both strategies are viable and could work.
Yeah, and I think it 100% depends on your starting team, MJ, and then you have to build from there. So just, not that we ever speak about our teams, but just to give it a team so everyone can sort of follow along.
That's fine.
Yeah, that was something that looking at the players we had at the start of the year, leapt out to me as there was some guys I was really, really confident would be top of their line. So again, some might call it old school, but I identified those as, Dawson, Bontempelli, Oliver, and then, Taranto, Dunkley, Rosie. So that was sort of a base. And obviously with how those guys have gone, they've ended up being the top of their line. And there was a few correctional ones after round 2, which was a Nick Dacos, a Tim English. And all of a sudden, just looking at the team I've had, it's been really the top end guys. So when I look at my advantage against the rest of the competition, it's that a lot of teams don't have all those guys. They might have a couple, they might not have many. So when I'm going forward now, that's something I want to keep building and keep stacking. Tom Stewart was one of my trade-ins. Petrarca, Cripps and Petrarca were my 2 ins last week in SuperCoach. So I'm building that base where clearly I'm going a bit more pricey. And the theory is, just from my experience, is when you get to that back end of the season, it's really hard to have all those top end guys. And I want them as early as possible because over the years, there's always someone that's 350, 400K that gets a role change in the back half of the year.
Yeah.
And that's how I'm going to offset these spends of, 550K plus is keeping that scoring power of the very, very top, the guys I want as long as possible. But then also offsetting it with guys that in a 10-week stretch, I think can match those guys that maybe people have paid up 60, 70, 80K more in their respective lines. And that's something I feel like, whether it's DeGoey from 2 years ago, Darcy Cameron from the year before, Toby McLean was one of those guys.
Early days.
They just always emerge. And it might be a Luke Davies-Uniacke like last year, someone that is a top 8 that is only 500K, 450K. So for me, that's with the base I've got of just the really top heavy guys. If I think they can do it, and that's always the game, isn't it? You've got to make sure that they can do what you're paying for from them. So for me, that's where I've gone, just to really keep building that strength. And the people that don't have Dawson, well, they're probably just going to put Dawson to the side. They're going to put Oliver to the side, and they're going to try to find value and catch up a different way. And that's the thing about this game is it's all well and good if you're scoring 2,500, but you're versing everyone else. So you've got to have points of difference to separate yourself. And just with the way my squad's fallen, that's how I've looked at my upgrades. But that's also my contingency is I might have to hold an Ashcroft a bit longer until I find who that person is that gets the role chance. I might just have to be a little bit more patient. And using last week as an example, that was obviously one that was helpful because the two big upgrades were, they averaged 160 between them. So that's a really, big jump on maybe the people that have a Hopper, Setterfield, Warple, those guys that maybe are stagnating to a degree. Now they've probably made a little bit more cash and it might be easier to facilitate those upgrades. But that's always a consideration. And, last year it was a Nick Dacos. You could have held Nick Dacos. You spent a trade getting him out, and the person that you went to, you were probably hunting value at that time, didn't really perform any better than a Nick Dacos. And maybe that's Ashcroft this year. Maybe it is a Connor McKenna that's close enough that it's not worth it. So for where I'm at, it's probably more of get the top and be a little bit more patient on the cows, use the loopholes. Obviously, we know benches are thinning, so it's getting tough. And that's obviously the risk because I'm probably carrying a rookie on field a little bit longer than maybe some other sides that are a bit more value or mid-price based. But again, if the Olivers and the Cripps and these guys are going to keep dropping 130s, it makes it a bit more palatable when you're trying to only find a 50 from a cow. So that's probably just how it's fallen for me. And again, competing against the other thousands of coaches, I just want to keep building that strength of guys that maybe they wouldn't have the cash or courage to maybe go to at that top bracket. And if they can do what I think they can do, maybe it will be that little point of difference that will get me over the line.
Yeah, I like it. And in a moment, I'm keen on MiniMonk, who, again, has got some other approaches that coaches might have pursued through the year, or he himself has in some of the formats, and how that can be outplayed next. But, Kane, there are guys like, and we'll talk about some of these guys in more depth in a moment, like a Braden Fiorini, who might be an option for some at the moment, a Rory Atkins, these mid-price guys that have a variance in season early days. This is where I'm curious to unpack that thought. You've got the best of the best. You've got the right cows, and now you're playing this waiting game at times for the top end guy to get at the right time, the cow to fatten up, the right cow to jump onto and off. What happens when these sort of mid-price guys, not in your early squad or correctional trades, but mid-season come? Can you or should you change strategy, or does that do some damage to what you're trying to approach?
Oh, you've definitely got to consider them, MJ, because, Jason Johannesson and Jack Zeeble, the way they're traveling at the price you were getting them, mid 350K sort of bracket, like they might just do that job that maybe people paid 100K more for a Will Date. So you've got to have these considerations. A Fiorini's one that in the midfield, it's going to be really, really tough. There's just so many options. We know, especially when you get towards the buys, one tag game can really make a top end premium be 500K, and you've always got to weigh up that difference. I think with SuperCoach, where it does simplify things, is the trades. To bring a Fiorini in, to know you're probably going to have to get him back out, that's where it can really, really hurt you. But you have to consider them, MJ, again, because these are the guys that when we start the squad next year, we're going to say, but from round 7 onwards, they averaged 100 and they were only priced at 85. Like,
Yeah.
That's the guy for me. Once we start getting through maybe the next couple weeks, that's who I'm looking for. Again, who's had that big role change? Who's the guy that's going to come home hot? And often it's, teams falling out of finals, do something different.
Yep.
Or an injury happens. So for Fiorini, it would be a no from me. I just don't see what the end game is there and what the hope and expectation is, with a Tuke Miller coming back in. And it was really more of a committee at the Suns. It wasn't like he just strolled in and had Tuke Miller's role. They really did share it along. So it's an awkward price bracket. For me, it's probably one, if you're over sort of 260, 70K, I want to have at least the hope that you could be held for a long, long time.
And especially
maybe
if that's
buyers
the
is something
structure and play of how you've been doing it. That makes sense. So for you, MiniMonk, then in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, where coaches might have, and again, there will be parallels for super coaches that have played it this way too, but they've started with the Dacos, the Days, Setterfields, the Warples, the Sheed, who's probably moved out now, Callahan. Talk to me about coaches that have done this approach, and then now as they find themselves with a Setterfield tapping out, a Fiorini bobbing up, and Atkins is there again. Different formats, different approaches, but talk to me about that mindset of hunting value outside of cows alone, and these middle range guys, the strategy both at the start and both now in the season proper.
I think there needs to be a distinction made between hunting for value and quote unquote mid-price madness.
Yes.
You could have started your team with all of Setterfield, Sheed, Warple, Callahan, Dacos, Young, Sarong. And chances are it probably would have gone all right. Yeah. But it's really hard to know when to move these players in and out. And that's the biggest trick. We've seen it with Warple. A lot of people trade him out. The next week, Day gets suspended for 2 weeks. He comes back and he pops 3 big scores in a row. And now coaches are thinking, when do I trade him out now? Someone like Callahan has a really good round 1 and then cops a massive hit on his shoulder, has a poorer second and third week, and then comes back and absolutely brains it for the next 3 weeks and generates a lot of cash. This is always the problem with these types of mid prices. And that's why it's a bit of a riskier strategy. But hunting for those underpriced premiums can be an absolute winner. We're talking the likes of, Rosie, Dacos, even Day to an extent this year, Sarong. Yeah. They've all been fantastic picks for the coaches that have started him. Yeah, Green as well. I mean, even through this 1 week suspension, he's still been a phenomenal pick, and he's still a player that coaches see as potentially a top 8 midfielder across the formats, which at his starting price is phenomenal. But where this strategy really starts to take effect is now. Because you've got to be really careful about who you're upgrading to. And this is something that I'm trying to be very conscious of the upgrades that I'm making for my teams is I can't afford to spend up for the likes of Oliver, Laird, Petrarca in formats, Cornelio in formats as well, because I don't see where I'm going to be able to afford the next upgrade after that and the one after that as well.
Yes.
You've got to be able to see the long play with this sort of strategy. I could afford, if I'm talking about my particular team, I could afford to trade up to Oliver in formats this week. But I don't think it's the right play to do in this particular circumstance for my team because it doesn't allow me to do upgrades in the future. Which is why sometimes paying up for those sorts of players and starting with them can be beneficial. But what it does allow, and what this strategy does allow, is it allows you to continue to get those upgrades week in, week out. So if you can get a premium who you think is probably close enough to top 8, top 10 across that line between now and the end of the season, and you can do that week after week after week until you hit the buys and you hit that full premium team then, while still being able to maintain good rookies on your field, the likes of Ashcroft, Chandler, Sheasel, Chincotta, that's where this strategy starts to pay off. That's where you've got to be able to get to. You've got to be able to hit that full premium team, buy the buys. And if you can do that and you have that, you're golden.
Yeah.
I think that's such a good point, MiniMonk. And that's the key with the word upgrade, because some people's view of upgrade is the top.
Yeah.
Whereas what you're saying is it's an upgrade that you're forecasting, researching that says, you know what, for where they're at with what's to come, that's going to be worth enough. And that little bit of cash I save will then facilitate the next one and it rolls on. But that's, I think the thing that's hard for some people is what constitutes an upgrade, because especially in the limited trade formats, if you do have, say a Ridley type and you trade in someone, you think it's there, and then all of a sudden, post buys, you're stuck with this guy that's 10, 15 points a week to those real upgrades.
Yeah.
And they're costing you, and you're saying, I'm already short on trades. I can't afford to get him out. You know what I mean? That's where it's like, are you better off? And that's where timing's so important, isn't it? If a Cade Chandler can make you another 30 and that premium can come down another 30 by waiting a week, is that the better upgrade in long term? You might lose points that week by not doing the upgrade. And I think that's the balance that's always so hard is we know people love the upgrade cadence and you don't want to just be forcing upgrades, but patience is pretty important too, if making sure it's the right upgrade. MiniMonk?
It's the same with like holding cash in the bank as well. Like if you can wait that extra week and have that cash in the bank, I'm talking very specifically for Dream Team and SuperCoach here, because I think in AFL Fantasy, it's a bit different. But if you have 150, 200K in the bank and go, I'm not using that this week because I know with the 2 rookies I want to trade out next week, I can hit that top 6er, top 8er at their minimum price, then you can afford to wait that week on them. And you can look 3, 4, 5 weeks into the future and be like, this is the target players that I'm looking for. You can't say I want specifically this player because they could go out and get 180. They can go out and get injured. You don't know what's going to happen. But if you have the options there and you're looking ahead and thinking, I'm looking for players in this price point, on this buy round, in this position this week, with these rookies coming out of my team, you can start to plan and start to think, how much cash do I need to have this week? Who am I upgrading to this week? And plan, for 4 or 5 weeks for when we hit round 12, because that's where we're all aiming for at the moment. We're all aiming for what is our team going to look like as we hit that first buy round? And then where am I going from there?
And that's the thing I think that's important when people are upgrading is, we spoke about, is it worth that upgrade? Or are you better waiting the week to get the better premium? I think, people just want to upgrade. It's the most exciting part of the game, clearly. But where that math quickly catches up, if, for example, if we're doing it this week with some 15 games to go and you make 50 points on the upgrade this week, but if you go to that premium that's 5 to 10 points worse off than the one you would get next week by just waiting for cash to increase a little bit more or the premium to come down, quickly they're going to easily recoup that. They're going to recoup those points in 5 or 6 weeks, let alone the other 7 or 8 that's afterwards. And now you're still considering, well, do I have to trade that, let's just call them Jordan Ridley, again to get the Sinclair when I could have just waited another week? Yes, it's not exciting. I haven't upgraded. People are saying your upgrade cadence is off, but for your team, it might just be better to get that better player. And yes, you might be an upgrade behind, but that player over the course of the remaining season will make up those points for you.
And we see that all the time, don't we? Yeah, go MiniMonk.
And the last part with that is the rookies that you're trading into as well. There's a lot of coaches in Dream Team, in SuperCoach, in Fantasy that have gotten a chin cotter already. And now the cupboard's looking pretty dry. So if you're trying to make that downgrade, trying to scrape all of that cash off to get that top line premium, or even to get someone in that 550K bracket, 800K bracket in Dream Team, 800K bracket in AF, where are you going down to? That's the tricky part. And I think that's what's making coaches very, very anxious and making coaches look very creatively this week.
And that is the downside of that strategy as opposed to a guns and rookies, because just in my example, I'm not worried about having to field the rookie. I've had that rookie from the start. I had an extra rookie most likely because I had the premium. And that's where the Petrarca and say an Oscar Baker starts versing, a Warple and a Hopper. And again, you'd love the Hopper to be a Petrarca or a Bont, but also, on the other end, you need the premium, you need the cow to go down or the mid-pricer to go down to a cow. So that's the fascinating thing is if the rookies are present, that's where that mid-price or that value strategy can really explode. You just keep churning them over and there's cash being made across, your whole squad. But also when the guns and rookies, when the rookies do their job, they outperform their price better than anyone, way better than the mid-prices. And that's the flip side is you don't have to worry about an Oliver. You don't have to worry about a Jordan Dawson. Again, it's always contingent on picking the right player.
Correct.
And again, just to use that example, if you're picking Jordan Dawson and he's going at 125, or you got Bont at 127, or, Tim English at 131 in SuperCoach, these are big numbers. What they started at, they were great value. And that's always the fascination. And that's the hardest part is you set this strategy at the start of the year. And again, if you're mid-price and there's cows everywhere, you're just laughing. You're just going one up, one down, and you are getting the top.
Yes.
But when they're not there and you're taking two mid-prices that are really comfortable on-field plays and potentially exposing them to rookies that you don't want anywhere near the field, that's where you get really, really fascinating results. And the risk appetite has to be weighed carefully because you can very quickly have donuts popping up left and right.
Yeah, well, speaking of
But again,
donuts,
they both work, MJ. That's the thing. And the hard thing is
true. Well,
one might work 1 year more than the other, just based on look how these premiums are going. There's really guys that have separated.
Perspective and then the luck of the pick. If you started Oliver over Laird, huge
100%.
difference. You started a Young over Dacos, huge difference.
People started Stewart over Dawson and then thought Stewart was out for a long time. Traded him.
Doherty out for a long time.
And then he's come back anyway. And then,
it's ridiculous.
It's crazy.
These are the luck of the season. These are the hindsight things we can look and learn and reflect for future years. And you've both talked about this idea of planning for the future. And where you're ranked at right now, we talked about this a little bit last week, while a level of indication of how your year has gone, it's often these 50-50 calls more than anything else, either who you captained for that week, which mid-pricer you chose over another, which rookie roulette did you get right. It's these 2 or 3 small permutations and variables that become the outcome between why you're ranked in the top 1,000 or 2, or why you're sitting in the 20, 30, 40,000 rank, or the 5, 6, 7,000 rank in Dream Team, and you're going, my year is done, when in essence, it's potentially 10 variations over a 7-week period have caved that place you're in. I say that because we're heading to the buys now. We're walking into round 8, and 2 really important things are about to come. 1, the multi-buy round. So the best of 18, opportunities to do 1 additional trade per week. And there's also DPP additions right on the very edge of that, which potentially, given some of the names we might be getting, could shake the game up drastically in the middle of our plans. Perfect time for it, I know, when you think of it. But it's the time that trades, both in terms of our upgrade cadence and our upgrade targets, could really come through there. What's some thoughts and some advice you could both give for our listeners around this month before the buys? Maybe not what to do during the buys, but the month up to it. What are the plans, the structures, the processes that's going to help them make sure that when they do hit the buys, they really fire away?
Look at the premiums that you've got playing on each buy at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest one to look at the moment. If you've got 1 premium for round 12, like I don't think that there's going to be any coaches in that spot at the moment, because chances are most coaches have at least 2 of Goulden, Dunkley, Marshall, Steele, Sinclair types, if not 3 or 4 of them. And, bolster the one that you're the weakest in terms of the number of premiums. If you've only got 1 premium on that particular buy round, I think with the exception of maybe round 13, because there's a lack of genuine premiums on that buy round, try to bolster that buy round first. I know it feels really strange to bring in a round 12 buy player this week, because they're going to be missing one of their next 5 games, but they're going to be playing the 3 weeks after that.
Yeah.
You make the points back up there. And then try to backload your premiums to an extent. I'm not saying go 12 premiums on the last buy, but you want maybe 7 or 8 or 9 on that buy. Because if worst case scenario happens and you're running short of scores, you can flick your worst premiums that are on that buy to someone else and recover a bit of points that way. So you kind of want to stack it a little bit. It should be a slope. You should increase the number of players that you have that are missing that week, and talking premiums. And then start to look at where your trades are going to lie after that, or before that rather, in terms of what rookies are coming out of each week. We know someone like Will Ashcroft has the round 12 buy. Do you want to be holding him all the way up to that? Or do you think he's a player that you can move on a bit earlier? We're talking about someone like Hopper. He's got the round 15 buy. Do you want his score all the way through the buys, or do you want to flip him now?
Setterfield probably in that mix too. Is it now or round 14? Yeah.
Setterfield is another great example for that. Because then you can start to think about, what players am I looking to trade out at that buy? Is that a Jason Johannesson that you might be bringing in this week in SuperCoach Dream Team or Fantasy? Is it a Zach Butters, who's been performing decently well, but probably not at a top 6 level? These are the type of players that you can say, right, they're nice to hold to around 15, and then they've done their job. See you later, get a premium in. And I think that's how you got to start to look at it. You got to look at, who's coming into your team and who's leaving your team, up until the bye, and then probably through the buys a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's good. Kane, from you?
Yeah, it's spot on, because the thing as well is, again, people worry about having, and you always say this, MJ, more than anyone I've ever heard, but you can't just count the number of players you've got in the buys. What are the premium scores? And I look at people, wanting to trade a Roberts, a Constable, a Chesser, these guys that have no money on their head just to help you in a buy round that you may or may not even need their score. Like, to be honest, those are the last things I'm worried about. If it gets to that point, and I'm, and as MiniMonk said, if you've built your team, cognizant of buys, you have back-ended.
Yes.
And I think with the teams that are on that last buy, you can understand why it's pretty easy to back-end anyway. But you'd much rather move that premium to the pick of another line or another premium and get the 100, 120, 130 if you can pick the right matchup and be on that way, because we've known people have spent all this time sideways into a cow. Again, if the cow's playing that time of the year, it's very unlikely that they've got great job security. Something must have drastically happened in their season or someone else's for them to even be playing at that point of the year.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee they give you much more than a 30 or a 40.
That's true.
And you've spent a trade doing so. So if you're going to spend a trade, you might as well at least go for a big score, take advantage of a matchup, and hope that that player can deliver you something that you're happy with. And maybe even it is a cash grab. Maybe it's a good premium that has a tough run coming up that you own to someone that's cheaper that allows you to do another upgrade. Like, those are the things when I look at this year and the lack of cash that we maybe have coming in, that I go, well, that's a better way to spend a trade. There's no point worrying about having, 2 extra cows on the field when it could be 1 premium.
Yeah.
At least it's something that I can maybe make cash from and get points. So I think that's a massive consideration. But again, if you are going to take a chance on a guy, maybe you do say they have to be around 14 or 15. At least you've got 6 teams to pick off if they're around 14 player, and you've got 12 if they're around 15. So maybe if it is a Johannesson type that's got that last buy round, you think there's 100, 150K, some good points on field. They play through the first 3 buys. Those are the type of people that come into consideration. And I do understand, MJ, for a Gold Coast team that has a lot of people in it, that is the appeal, because they're there for the 3 buy rounds that are the challenging ones. The Gold Coast and the Geelong buy is not challenging in terms of getting 18 players. And that was the key thing we found out in the preseason. If it was going to be 22 players, that's always an issue, because there's so many players that are unlikely playing in our team. Steve, the likes of a Roberts, Constable, Chester, those types. But once it went to 18, we were pretty confident we would find 18.
Yeah.
Minimum. So, yeah, I think it's something that's creeping up, and you have to keep in mind with every upgrade. And maybe if it's 2 50-50 guys that you're not quite sure on, that's where the buy can sway you to be the later buy player.
Yeah, it's true.
And as you say, it's best 18. Your best 18 scores count. So even if you have 25, 26 playing that week,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter what the bottom 6 of those are. It doesn't matter what the bottom 7 or 8 of those are, because their scores aren't going to count. And this is why the premiums matter much more than the rookies that you've got on field during those buy rounds, because chances are you can hit 15 or 16 premiums in your team through each of the buy rounds if you plan now.
Yep.
There really isn't many situations where you shouldn't be hitting at least 15 premiums if you
at least a couple
upgrade.
of them. Agree. Totally agree. Yep. Totally agree with that.
And so this is why we don't need to worry about a lot of these dead rookies yet, because, okay, who knows what's going to happen? A Johnson could come back straight off his suspension in 2 weeks. A Chesser could come back for the Eagles next week. A Cowan could come back into the team. It's too
There's nothing
early
more
to
painful
start.
than that, MiniMonk, is that you make this early move. Oh, yes, this rookie will help me then. And then the one you traded out, Saligo last year, MJ. Oh, he's back in the team, is he? I remember I traded him 5 weeks ago for $12,000, and that player's now actually a dead cow as well.
It was Josh Dunkley back in 2016. Plays the first 2 games. He's on the bubble. We're all going, get rid of him. round 10, he comes back and plays every game for the rest of the year and goes like mid-70s. So
and
it's
not
exactly
to say that we
approach.
don't downgrade to cows through the buys that we know are at least playing that week. This is a totally different thing. It's when people are saying, I'm going to correct that now so I've got enough playing players. Like, you just don't know with these cows. You're better off just saying, I'm not going to worry about the guys that got no cash on their head. Let's just keep
count it as a red
upgrading
dot.
or just keep saving the trade. And again, 3 trades in the buy rounds with how our squads are placed, and we know with
Plus
the boosts.
Yeah.
With the boosts, though, MJ, even early in the season, that's allowed teams to be more advanced.
Yeah.
Correct.
We have more premiums by the buys, and the last buys later than normal seasons anyway.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
and the other thing is that everyone's in the same boat.
Yeah.
Everyone's up the creek without a paddle with the red dots. Everyone's benches look utterly terrifying at this stage of the season. I don't know that there are any coaches, any really good coaches that have less than 2 red dots on their bench in any format.
I agree.
And chances are the average number of red dots on benches is probably about 4. It's really, really rough. And I don't think I've seen a year like it, but we've just got to be patient. You've just got to wait until the time comes to be able to shave that 100K off of that rookie, or to be able to sideways that rookie to someone else that's playing during the bye. There's no point getting panic stations now because you're not going to get the donut right now. It's not like all of the rookies that you've got in your team are suddenly going to get the flu, drop down, be out for the week. You just got to wait, and just got to wait until you can pull that trigger and you get the access to the extra trades. You get the access to best 18 on field. Something else will come up. Another rookie will come onto the bubble that you can jump onto. But patience right now is just unbelievably virtuous.
And the one thing I will say on the cows is the mid-season draft period, is right before the buys. So
correct.
If there's ever going to be a time where we get an influx, it's just ahead of round 12. So that's the thing that sometimes we get a few, sometimes we get none.
Yep.
But it's going to provide some opportunity. If clubs are selecting these guys more often than not, at least half of them have a role that they can play, whether it's just filling in for injuries or genuinely a piece that maybe a contending team thinks they might need in depth. So that's a good chance in those 4 rounds. We're going to get a whole new host of players added to the game. Whether they play or not, who knows? But it's another option at the very least.
Yeah, it's good.
It's like last year, one of the most important players that we got at that mid-season draft only played 2 games for us and didn't score very well. But it was DreamTeam coming in at a base
huge
ruck forward. It was the answer that so many coaches needed, and it came from the clouds. And 60-70% of highly ranked coaches across the formats traded into him the first week he was named because it just provided that flexibility and that cash. And something like that.
And we saw Cully. We saw Cully in the back end of last year.
Carmichael
there's guys
as well.
that there's guys that you go, exactly. You go, there's a role there for them. Like, even remember Durden? We were keen on Sam Durden for Carlton. Like, there will be people from that crop.
Newcomb the year earlier. Yeah, there's always going to be someone that pops.
They go. So if you're looking for the next wave, it's time that next wave could be after that mid-season draft, because it does coincide with the buys. Whereas MiniMonk said, 2 games might be all you need. And then your full premium. And if the premium's injured, guess what? You're trading them anyway. You're hoping you don't need to rely on your bench. So those loophole days that we take advantage of in the first sort of 10, 12 rounds, they're behind you. If you've got the luxury and you throw an E on a cow on a Friday or a Saturday and they pop, great. But more often than not, and maybe that's your consideration this year, is maybe you do go more durability in your premiums. Maybe you are scared that Jack Steele, with the shoulder injury he's sustained, that won't hold up. Now, he might just well do what Jack Steele does and be an absolute beast, but your appetite there for risk and durability might be something that you say this year, you know what, I'm going for the guy that doesn't miss as opposed to the guy that's had some nagging injuries. Maybe it's, well, I'm not going to go the guy that plays for a bottom 5-6 team that their season could be over. Like, how many times have we said that? Go for the teams that are playing for something, playing for top 4, playing for top 8, because more often than not, the role's at least stable.
Yes.
And the scoring often is too.
So we talked about these players and plans, and I want to come back to the cash cow conversation in a moment, because this does feel, while there's probably a few waves of cows to come, there's the mid-season draft, We know a George Wardlaw's coming. That could be as early as this week, but he's probably the most big name ticket draft pick that we know will come. We know there's a few Giants players that they've alluded to that could be on the way, but it's all about role and opportunity. And then we will see an absolute ton of them just in the final 6 weeks of the year. We'll all curse the coaches because they've broken the rookies for us because we need them next year. But as you've both made the point of, teams are out of contention. They're not trying. They're bringing new things. They're just giving kids opportunities. We'll see that. So there will be kids and cows coming through. So that won't be a concern. But there is a pain point now. But it's one of the reasons why people are looking at the Gold Coast Suns a lot at the moment, not just because of the bye round they sit on and how that could help you through. But also, there's some significant value on price versus output, and there's opportunities in their game style that really lend itself to some really nice scoring. So when you get all those elements together, and I'm going to talk about some of the players in a sec, but MiniMonk, it's why the Gold Coast Suns are very much on a lot of people's radars.
It's because that hole got opened when Tuke Miller went down.
Correct.
And now everyone's looking for where is the opportunity to be able to take advantage of that in combination with their buy.
Correct.
This is the biggest moving week for people wanting to either go onto Gold Coast players or to avoid them full stop. And people moved last week. There was a lot of people in AFL Fantasy that moved
jumped on
to Fiorini.
Yeah.
And they might have been very happy with the score, but to my eyes, the role wasn't there. And the CBA showed that the role wasn't there. He wasn't getting inside mid-time, but he still scored really well. The bump went to someone who has done it before, David Swallow.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump onto him? Probably not. He's probably not the type of guy you want to jump onto, but there are a bunch of other options that are very appealing in this group as well.
There really is. You've got Rory Atkins, we've seen some reasonable scores from him. You've probably got to go back a handful of years, but he's shown 70s and 80s, and tons is within his wheelhouse when the role is there. You've got Matt Rowell, who didn't get a significant bump, but didn't need it because he was already having a significant midfield role. But he's shown he's got tons and big tons within his wheelhouse. Powell is another of those defenders. D-Mac is another of those defenders. That's Darcy McPherson, if you're not sure who I'm talking about, that is picking up this incredible amount of possessions. Fiorini, who MiniMonk has alluded to already. Noah Anderson thrived in the extra responsibility and was one of the key dominating pieces against Richmond last week. And gosh, even a Ben King for super coaches at a value point trying to get through there. We've got these fascinating guys for all those reasons. So how hard do we go into this? Tuke's not coming back before the bye unless he goes full Doc and Tom Stewart. He's not coming back before the bye, which means if you're trading into these guys, it's probably not just a up to the bye approach. It's a through the bye approach. So we're looking at an 8-week window of time that we're hoping to benefit from. So let's look at the Suns for a minute and what we should be thinking and doing about these guys. MiniMonk?
I think you have to caveat that 8 weeks versus 4 or 5 weeks, depending on the player that you're getting onto.
That's a good shout.
And I think that actually needs to be a distinction made. Someone like Anderson, Fiorini, Rao, Darcy McPherson, these types of premium guys, these are players that you absolutely would have to hold through until at least the end of the buys.
Yes.
And then look to flip them at round 16. But someone like Rory Atkins at his price point, I don't think the same true holds. Ben King, maybe you could hold through, but again, I don't think the same thing holds because these are players that you're looking to make cash and fast. And then when they hit their buy, because we're not going to have a lot of trade out candidates at that round 13 buy anyways.
That's true.
Particularly in AFL Fantasy where you've got 3 trades no matter what, use them or lose them in that week. These players become a bit more attractive because of that.
Yeah.
But if we start to break down those options, they're all appealing for different reasons. Atkins isn't on the bubble yet in DreamTeam and SuperCoach.
Nope.
You can afford to wait a week and see how it washes out. The Suns have taken an absurd number of marks the last 2 weeks. Might be opposition. It might be a game style change. We can't really tell that quite yet because they played a game style that didn't have a huge amount of marks in the first 4 weeks. So in those formats, I
Well,
think
yeah,
you
and
can
just for
afford to
context
wait.
too, so they were 80 marks through the first 5 games, and they've gone 135 the last 2 weeks. Now,
Yeah, wow.
looking at
It's
it from
ridiculous.
how I've seen it, it's the opposition more
I think
than
that's fair.
a game style change. That's just from what I saw watching the game. It's not their intention, but they had the game won against North. You're just trying to get through, and then under the roof with some of the skills and the way Richmond play, we know they invite a lot of points. So I think for me, that's a massive caveat when I'm looking at this scoring. You know, the team scoring's well up. You know, it's up enormously. They've gone 1,700 plus DT the last 2 weeks. So I think that's just a lens we have to watch and process these players through, that they had 2 really easy fantasy.
Well, they've got Melbourne,
free-flowing
West
games.
Coast, Brisbane, and then the Bulldogs and the Crows before the bye. So,
So
Crows
4
are
of those
pretty
5 are
restrictive. Yeah. None of the. It's this week that's nice for them.
Yeah, Melbourne's
Coming
nice,
after.
and West Coast is pretty
Depending
nice,
on the
but then
position,
next
it's
three.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the other caveat to that is, yes, they've taken a huge amount of marks. We don't know if it's just because of their game style shift or because of the opposition. But look at where they play 3 out of their next 5 games. They play 1 up on the Gold Coast, and then they play 2 in Darwin back-to-back right before their bye. I don't think there's going to be any team that's going to be able to take 130 marks in a game up in the Northern
those
Territory.
conditions.
No.
Not in those conditions. It's just not going to happen. So if you're looking at those half-back flankers and wingers like Fiorini, Atkins, Darcy McPherson, Will Powell, who have racked up 10 marks for the last 2 weeks, that's probably going to drop to maybe 5 or 6 on those weeks if they're lucky. But then you want to look for the players that are actually going to be able to score despite that. And that's the inside-outside players. That's Anderson, that's Rao, and that's maybe, if Gold Coast are able to beat up on some opposition, Ben King.
Yeah.
He becomes an interesting proposition, particularly in SuperCoach.
Yeah.
I wouldn't like him going up against Stephen May.
Not this week.
Personally?
Not this week.
No way.
No, and that's
I don't
the
like
thing
any
I think
key forward against May.
that's tough. Well, to be fair, Rewalt actually did a really good job on him.
He did.
In round 6, but yeah, odds on MJ, it's not usually great.
No.
So I think that's the thing with these Gold Coast players. Yes, that's awesome. They help you for all 3 bye rounds. But I start thinking a little bit deeper and I go, do I really need help in round 12? It's like, probably not. Probably be pretty fine then. And then, maybe I need a little bit of help in 14 and 15. But if they're not serving a role beyond that stretch of buys, is it really worth 1 in, 1 out in a 5-6 week period? None of them have. Now, Atkins is probably the one you could argue that if things went really, really well, he could get you through the buys, have made enough cash to be flicked on.
Sure.
That would probably be the one. But a lot of the others, you're asking for such a level of scoring to generate the cash that you just wouldn't trade them because they'd be doing premium levels if they're going to make 100, 150K from their current price. So for me,
and you're
banking
on them staying in the team.
Yeah,
You're
which
banking on the likes.
that's the thing with the cheaper guys. Now, I think if you like a Sun, you have to be looking at Anderson and purely just thinking this is a guy that we've loved how he started his career. He's literally just kept building and building.
Yeah.
He's got the inside-outside mix. He just does a lot of things. And that time was probably a few weeks ago. He started the season sluggishly.
Yep.
He's been brilliant since. And again, maybe that is something, again, season's over, we tell ourselves. Like Noah Anderson went 110. And his first 3 games, he averaged 78 and 85 across the formats. Like, I think that's the type of guy that has the game to just be in the mix. Now, the problem is he's just had a wicked stretch. 126 in DT the last 4, 119 SuperCoach. It's not cheap.
No, not anymore.
So that's the challenge, isn't it? That now he is on the same plane as a Steele, in the midfield. These type of guys that are genuine top 8 candidates. So for me, that's the Sun that has the appeal. Maybe in an AF format where you can get a little bit cuter with flicking them in and out.
Yep.
But as I said, the cheaper ones have the risk for a reason. They're not guaranteed to be in that side. I think the one that does fascinate me and it maybe has surprised me is Will Powell. Just the numbers. They're just ultra impressive. Like for someone like him to have that real big gap in SuperCoach, I think that's what's really alarming is he's showing that he can put 15, 20 points a week on that DT score. And that, when you're a defender and you've got that role that he has, a 50 or a 60, if that's going to be a 70 or an 80 as a premium, that's pretty handy. So he's one that maybe if you can put him on the same level as a Sinclair and a Sicily in your mind, you could go. But again, he's been great. So it's not exactly a bargain, is it?
No.
But the thing that's missed, I think, with Powell, and I've seen this discussion a little bit, 2 weeks ago when you had North Melbourne, he only had 64% time on ground because he went off for a HAA. His time on ground wasn't low because he was recovering from injury or because it was a bad rotation. He had to spend that time off of the ground, and he was tracking for a pretty good score in AF as well. AFDT, he was tracking for a 95. And SuperCoach, he still managed 125.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about the biggest role change in the team that Touk Miller's caused, Lockie Weller's gone more up the ground.
Correct.
Yep. You can see it by the kick-in numbers. You can see it by just watching the game. He's had to go up the ground more to a wing.
Yep.
And you look what Powell's absorbed. And if you're a fantasy coach, you're probably yelling at him. You're saying, Will, you've had 15 kick-ins the last 2 weeks. Why have you only played on from 9 of them? But he's fully taken over that whole role with Weller leaving. Before that, Weller had 7 of 7, 7 of 7, 6 of 6. And that's gone to Will. And he's just grabbed it with a 125 and a 143 in SuperCoach and then a 79 and a 127. And as MiniMonk said, you factor in the time he missed, he left some points on the table.
Yeah.
Now, that's probably your one. Now, clearly, if we were seeing them beautifully, we would have said, oh, yep, Miller goes out, Weller goes up the field, go Will Powell against a Richmond team that like defenders. We're probably a bit late to the party there, but that is the most significant role change that's happened because
yeah, it is.
Yes, Swallow's got some more time. Fiorini's come in. Alex Davies came back into the team. Like, there's been those type of midfield mixes.
Yeah.
But Lockie Weller vacating that kick-in role and giving it to Will Powell, who was already doing nice things.
Yeah.
It's just sent him over the edge, quite frankly. Now, could you grab Will Powell at the price,
probably
knowing that
not.
Touk's coming back?
Probably not, but maybe
It's
depending on the format. Yeah.
But again,
we got a timeline.
An AF play again. If you know that, hey, the eject button's after the buys or after enough of the buys that you feel comfortable with your team.
Mm-hmm.
And again, Melbourne is a team that can be inaccurate at times and give
That's
you
true too.
7, 8, 9 kick-ins.
Yep.
If things are going well. You think about what he did in that game where the opposition didn't really score. Like there probably is a 10-11 behind game where he gets most of those kick-ins. So he's the one that's really impressed me. I probably don't have the guts to do it.
Yeah, I don't either.
Just because I don't know if it lasts. But again, he might be that guy. There's always someone we don't have on our radar that really pops, and it could just be Will Powell.
It could be. So we're talking about guys that are on our radar. It's a fascinating week for a lot of different reasons. We've got these mid-price guys that some of them have stalled for us in delivering for us. Now, some might be going, you know what? The plan and the cadence means I'm still going to run them to the buy. I'm going to forego giving some cash. I'm talking about guys like Setterfield and Hopper that they're not being what I'd needed anymore, but the plan is this. I'm going to stick to the plan. I might lose 30K, hope that those 100 plus scores can return, and I keep cows off the ground, and I might be in the same spot. That's the play, or it's the right, I'm going now. So there's some coaches that are in this situation. There's others that are seeing these premiums that are priced at a really nice spot. Jack Sinclair across the format is ripe for the picking. Jack Steele, after coming back from injury, took a week to find his feet, but last weekend with that 120 across the formats is ripe. Andrew Brayshaw, much has been talked about his slow start to the year. We've known that there's been a knee concern behind it, and just in the past handful of days, both he and the club have come out and said, look, he's pain-free now, and we've started to see an uptake in his midfield opportunity and just the way he moves around the ground. There are others, but using them as there's these premiums that are ripe and right for now. There's some mid-prices that have stalled, and then you've got cash cows that have arguably hit their ceiling of cash generation. I say that with the caveat of the cash cow crisis you both alluded to. You've got an interesting week this week, depending on the format you've played. You've got Angwin on the bubble in Dream Team and SuperCoach, and still quite affordable in AF around about 250k. Sincotta is another on the bubble, the best break even in the limited trades formats going around, and I think he's still under 300,000 in AFL fantasy. You could also throw, for Dream Team and SuperCoach anyway, Simpson from Geelong, and Teakle, even if you wanted to really stretch the friendship. So you've got these 4 cows, and the beauty of them is they're available in all these positions, some with DPP, so you're not hamstrung with the trades you can make. So my thought that I want to put out to you boys both is this, remembering your formats of SuperCoach, Kane, and then Dream Team and Fantasy MiniMonk. Should we be going hard on the rookies this week? So much so we're even using a boost in the limited trades to pull it off? And should we be, and then the second question is, should we be letting these bottomed out premiums go for one more week, knowing that this might be our last chance to get a good cow as we head to the buys?
Well, it's a good question, MJ. I think Chincotta's, well, the good thing is he's on Friday night as well. So there's nothing funky there with a Thursday game, and we don't know the Sunday teams. Like, we're going to know if he's in or not. I don't see how he'd be out of that team. I think he's been brilliant since he played against the Saints. He's certainly added something, and now that Sard and Doherty are back, that Carlton run is brutal. But also at the same time, if he's in there and he's performing, then there's no need to change it. Like, they're just right in the thick of it. The issue for mine just with Simpson and with Teakle is, unfortunately, this year more than ever, that 30, 40K or even a Teakle, which is much more compared to an Angwin, is a huge difference in the premium you can get on the other end. So for me, looking at Teakle's price, would have to be a very specific team that has enough faith in him to grab him. And especially when you start looking, Draper and Phillips can be quite restrictive. Then you've got North Melbourne with Goldie, Melbourne, Richmond, Hawthorn, Dogs. So he's a funny player. Finlayson, when the game was on the line, gets that major ruck role. Still not feeling super confident. So I have a guy in my format, SuperCoach, that's 200K-ish, just under. When I'm struggling for cash, it doesn't have great job security. He's not, a full-time ruck in that Port team. It's a no from me. MiniMonk in the other two. What do you think?
I think Chincotta, as we've talked about, if he is named for Friday night, he is the must-have rookie. If you don't have him already in AFL Fantasy, or you don't have him in Dream Team, you have to trade into him this week. Because the cash he's going to generate just from this game alone might be enough to force an upgrade later on in the season. It might be enough to fix a guy who's 10th or 11th in the line to a top 5, top 6 guy. And that can be invaluable when you get these opportunities, when they are absolute basement like they are in Dream Team, and same in SuperCoach, you've just got to jump on. And then we've got the likes of Angwin and Simpson. And as you've so elegantly said, Kane, we're worried about their job security. We don't know how long these players are going to last in their team. Some people are saying that Simpson's in and he's going to stay in because of Stengel's injury. Cats have done us no favors with their injury reporting and have said medium term. And there's a lot of other TBCs on that injury list.
Yeah.
Which is, very painful for us fantasy coaches trying to figure out how long their job security is. I think it's probably 3 or 4 weeks. I think he's played pretty well. Yep. I think he's a mature ager. And I think with the way that the Cats build is, they've got to put time into players like this if they're going to have the depth to make a good charge at the grand final again, because that's the way they're tracking at the moment. And it allows them to rotate some of their older players out because he's a very versatile player. He can play a lot of roles. That means that he's scoring, probably fluctuates a little bit more. But at this time of the season, we're basically just trying to take whatever we can get. Whereas Angwin, I think, has a bit better job security. He's on that wing. But there's always the likes of, Coach was talking about Faye earlier in the week.
Yeah.
There's every chance that he comes in for Angwin, and all of a sudden you've got a red dot right there. And for that combination, of job security and also the potential scoring, I think I'm leaning towards Simpson over Angwin. And I think obviously this is very Dream Team specific.
Of course, they're different
AFL
price
Fantasy,
points in the other one, yeah.
Yeah, if Simpson was the low price that he was in Dream Team as he is, if he was the same price in Fantasy, he would be the cash cow that people would be jumping onto this week.
Sure.
Unfortunately, that's not the case because of how they price players. But in Dream Team, Simpson's the play. And I think in Fantasy, Angwin's probably the play because the cupboard's bare.
And I think that's the thing in SuperCoach that makes it really hard, is upgrades are so tight that it's over 40K difference between Simpson and Angwin. And I think that's the issue, is it's hard enough to get an upgrade, let alone the one you actually want. And if you're not 100% sure on them, that's where, for me, especially if it's the difference between a player you really like as the upgrade and maybe a guy that you settle for. And again, it really is the difference between a Will Powell and a Jack Sinclair type. Like, that's the type of range. You're going from shopping in, under 500 as a defender to the 540 range where you feel pretty comfortable that you're going to be able to hold the player. And I think that's the hardest thing, is we just don't know. Like, yeah, Josh Faye's been really good. But that's the hard thing with VFL, isn't it? Is although the AFL guys go back down to that level and smash it, that's what they do. So I think it's a credit to Angwin that he has been in the system long enough to maybe secure that role. It's a young team. You wouldn't think's in finals and just needs to play these guys. So for me in SuperCoach, I'd be taking that 40K and just hoping that there's enough there with Angwin. Again, you don't want him on the field. You don't want him anywhere near the field. You just hope that he can play another 4 or 5 games across the next sort of 8 to 10 weeks. Again, there's every chance he could be a sub. And I think that's probably the one that hurts us, isn't it? We all had Dylan Williams in our plans, only for him to be the sub. And then you see how well he played when he came on as a sub, and then he was great against the Saints. And now he's well and truly gone, and he's definitely one I'd consider more than a Teakle. He's more or less the same price in SuperCoach as Teakle with that forward only status. So he's going to get defender status if you were to hold him until that next DP piece. But it's grim, MJ. It's Chincotta. It's a gap. It's another gap. I mean, I think it's a very small gap just on the price. Angwin to Simpson, and then Dylan Williams would be probably after them, and then Teakle. But it's tough. It's really tough, and I think that's the risk you might have to take just to get the upgrade and hope that you don't need an Angwin on the field.
Yep.
And then it's about what's coming on the horizon as well. Where are the downgrades coming next week? We might have Weddle.
Yeah,
it's probably the only one that some coaches have any confidence in Dream Team and SuperCoach, and probably not even in AFL Fantasy for next week.
No.
Unless someone comes out this week and plays a pretty good game and has a low break even. We're getting pretty grim on what the trade-in targets are. And I think this comes back to the discussion that we very much alluded to at the start of the podcast. Is now the right time to use a boost? Yes, we're concerned about the job security of the likes of Simpson and of Angwin, but they're on the bubble. And if they're named this week, this might be the last time that you can actually use a boost and get 2 rookies that are on the bubble that you might want to have in the same week.
Before the buys, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think, MJ, as well, the people that maybe even missed a Matty Johnson, if you're interested in, to say, a George Wardlaw, I think you'd be mental to not be interested in Matt Johnson.
Yep.
Like, I know he's going to copy his 2-week hit, but in 2 weeks' time, if he's there, he's 185K. Like, he's 15K cheaper than a Wardlaw in SuperCoach. So just because Matty Johnson's played, I thought he looked really good on the weekend. Yeah, the tackle was a mistake, and he's going to have to cop that. But and there's probably just another guy I'll throw in there who's an awkward one, and I think he's more of just your bench cover, and it's Arthur Jones. Yeah, 140K. He's locked down that small forward role.
He does.
Yes, he's averaging 30, and by picking him, he'd be the guy I'm saying Arthur Jones is never getting traded out. He's just going to sit on the bench.
No, it's about freeing up cash for your upgrade, isn't it? Yeah.
And maybe I'll fluke a game. No, he's only kicked 1 goal in his 5 games and he's averaging 30. But we know in that role, sometimes you have a game where you just grab 3. It just falls your way. You have a goal assist. He plays for a good team in the Dogs. If I'm in a spot of bother, and he's actually more or less got better each week he's played. So
that's fair.
If you're in a bit of a spot of bother, at least you know Arthur Jones is going to be there. He's not a money maker by any means, but hey, 35, 40 points is better than a donut. And at 140K, it might just be one game where it clicks for him and that gets him to 200. So don't rule him out as a guy that you know is at least going to be there for you. It's not flashy, it's not money making, but it could serve that role.
And again, round 15 bye.
Yeah.
And he's got a round 14 matchup against North Melbourne. So it's not a bad potential play. Look, we'll get to our Patreon questions, not in this episode. We'll do a special pop-up podcast for you. But before we do, I want to talk about, and wrap up this episode, I want to talk about looking at these future DPP guys that we're going to get on the very edge of the buys, because there's some interesting names right now that we want to talk about. Let's see if I can name them. MiniMonk's holding up some fingers for me to guess them. Let's see if I can get them correctly. Jaden Short, down to 2. That's a good sign. Christian Petrarca. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm down to 1, and he is using the middle finger, but he's holding it at the appropriate angle, so we're safe. Callum Mills.
Nope.
I mind that as a suggestion.
Give us what? Max Gawn?
Max Gawn.
Oh, yes. I was like, there's 4 I've got, so I'm wondering which one we didn't want to do. So let's talk about those guys. I think Mills is maybe a little more speculative because you're hoping Rampy holds out of that side. So you're hoping for some bad luck to go his way. Let's talk about
It's not just that, unfortunately, for Mills.
It's not.
It's horse doing horse things where Mills has been spending a lot of time on the wing and even time up forward.
Correct. He has been
so
the
it's
versatility
not looking good.
Everywhere guy. You need a lot of things to go your way to trade into Mills, and maybe he'll get to the point if he gets DPP and he's priced so low that there's no risk. But let's talk about those other 3. Short has shown it since he's come back. He can score as good as any other premium defender in the backline, but he's mid only. Petrarca, man, if he gets forward status, Taranto's got a battle on his, and Dunkley and Supercoach, he's got a battle for the number 1 forward spot without question. And Max Gawn, probably more Supercoach, but definitely across the formats, could also push that number 1 mantle with a few variables going his way. So it's probably more short relevant to focus on now than the other 2, but it's the caveat there of a month away from DPPs, a month away from the buys. They're priced nicely, all 3 of them actually. It's not the question of can you trade into them, because of course you can. But is it wise to do so, knowing you're missing out on potentially some other premiums in those lines you're looking for and the balance of your side? So in the last 5 minutes of this episode, boys, what's your take on these guys, specifically Short, Kane? Gawn's obviously big Supercoach relevant too. But what's your take on trading in and around these guys with likely DPP coming their way?
Yeah, I've got no problem trading into Short at all. I think that we've got so much flexibility in our teams that it's more or less irrelevant where they are. If you see him as a top 6 defender, I've got no problem grabbing him now and knowing that you're going to be able to swing him into that back line. He's reclaimed that role. You're walking into a matchup this week against West Coast. Now that was the game last year where he moved into the midfield and went absolutely nuts. I don't see that being as much of a need now. Liam Baker's really that Mr. Fix-It, and you can see in his scoring, it did suffer a bit when he gets thrown around. Yeah. The next 4's at the MCG for Short. Then he has, Giant Stadium, and then he goes Optus in the MCG. So it's a lot of footy in places that he's really, really good at scoring and has enough space to score. I think the only thing that is slightly frustrating when I look at him is that he is more expensive than a Sicily and a Sinclair. So again, in a team that's, injury ravaged and unfortunately finals look like they're going to, go by the wayside, could things chop and change? That's probably the only thing that makes me a bit apprehensive about Short.
Sure.
But there's no question that the guy's a scorer when he's got that role and he has that role.
Yeah. You'll take MiniMonk?
I think that Short is definitely a player that's interesting. Where we are, I think most coaches are short in midfield spots anyways.
Yeah.
I think most of us have a lot of defenders and have a lot of forwards just because of the way that we started teams and the way that upgrades have happened through the year. You know, we had Dawson, Dacos, Day, Zeeble, Sheasel, all get forward, well, a few of them getting forward defended flexibility and a few of them popping and becoming bona fide premiums. And so taking on someone that's going to get defender DPP soon enough and having them in your midfield for the time being doesn't hamstring you as much as it might have at the start of the year. And we know that Short can be a top 6 defender when he has that role. He is a very good player and they like the ball in his hands when he's playing band back there. So I think that Short is definitely one you could be looking to trade into. I think Petrarca is very interesting in SuperCoach.
I do too.
Maybe a little bit interesting in Dream Team and Fantasy, but probably not as much. I think he's shown in the past that he's a very SuperCoach friendly player. And he could be a top 8 midfielder, just pure and simple.
Exactly.
And that's where the appeal comes, because even if he doesn't get the DPP, he can still be close enough to match with the top line players. And his price tag this week in SuperCoach is under 600,000 still. Yeah. This might be the last week that he's under that price tag.
Correct.
Potentially for the rest of the year. He hasn't really had any bad games. His lowest score for the year, I think, is about a 96 or a 97. I mean, if you've got a player that's going that consistently in a team that's humming like they are.
And got a great fixture, ladies and gentlemen.
And has an amazing fixture, which started last week for some coaches who were aware of it. It's a very, very attractive play. And I think the one that a lot of coaches are hoping for, and I think this guy needs to be discussed alongside another player who's returning back from injury soon. Max Gawn getting ruck forward status. If that happens at round 12, him and the other player, Darcy Cameron, become about the most important players to be looking to trade into at round 12.
Yep.
Because their price tag will be great. Their scoring potential would be great. They provide cover for your ruck line in an instant. If, English, Sean Darcy, Rowan Marshall, Jared Witts, Riley O'Brien, if one of those gets injured, you have cover very quickly. And it's something that you want to have, especially in limited trade formats where you don't want to be able to you don't want to cop a donut and you don't want to have to trade one of those premiums out for a 1 week injury.
And also, no one really has a forward from that buy round.
Correct.
When you look at that buy round, Adelaide, Collingwood,
Exactly.
Essendon, Hawthorn, Melbourne, West Coast, it's the one after, obviously, with GWS, North Melbourne, Port, Bulldogs, Richmond. There's guys across all those defender and forward lines that are gone. I don't see many forwards. Maybe there's a Dylan Moore. There's not really many that you go, that's a forward. So if you do, need a forward there, it's probably Cade Chandler, I guess, who's the one, obviously, at the moment from a rookie perspective. But MiniMonk's right. Like, you're looking at your rucks, a lot of people have a combination of Darcy, Marshall, English, and Witts. They're every buy round but the round 14 buy round that Gawn's in. So it's fascinating. And at the end of the day, it's Max Gawn. We've only seen a handful of games with Gawn and Grundy together.
Yep.
The first one, he went berserk. Second, he was injured. Then he's been easing back into the team with Grundy. So that easing back might be the trigger to get us the status, get us a nice price. So I think that's a huge watch.
Yeah.
Huge watch.
I think that those two players, Darcy Cameron and Max Gawn, should be near the top of coaches' priority lists for either round 11 or round 12 trade-ins.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And you should be planning for that now. That's my hot take and my hot tip from this podcast. If you take anything away, think about that.
That's how you end a podcast, my friends. That is it right there. MiniMonk, thank you for your fine work, my friend. In fact, if you love hearing the dulcet tones of MiniMonk, our friends at Jock Reynolds.
I'm just glad he could fit us in. I'm glad he could fit us in, MJ.
Harry Sheasel of the fantasy community has fit us in, which is fantastic.
Keep him busy.
He's definitely
That's
keeping
great,
busy.
MiniMonk.
And we love that you're doing it too, mate. You're an absolute superstar. Mate, thank you for jumping on the podcast. We love having you a part of the coaches panel and of every single other fantasy podcast throughout the season so far. You've been an absolute beast, mate. Thank you once again, MiniMonk.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well done. You're part of the team, Harry. We don't need to thank each other. And Kane, mate, an absolute pleasure as always from you, mate. Nice to have you boys on the same pod for this episode.
Fun, wasn't it? It was good fun.
Yeah,
It was an absolute blast.
There you go. We'll keep mixing up the combos. Who knows? If you've loved this podcast, there's still plenty more to come. In fact, there's a weekly podcast we give to our Patreons that only they and our Spotify subscribers get from me. All the details for those are in the podcast link description. You can go and click on those links and check those out as well. And of course, you can follow us across social media. We're always having conversations with you and the community, sharing important things that you need to know. Good luck as you head into this next round. We hope it is kind for you. And from all of us here at the Coaches Panel, good luck, and we'll see you next week for another Strategy Roundtable.